I'm still slightly bemused about this move from I'm an expert on this and I have views to I'm a comedian.
I've never claimed to be an expert on anything.
This is the problem, Joe. If somebody
Wait a minute, you have to claim to be an expert on something to have an opinion on something?
No, you don't have to be. I'm not a historian, but I'm pumping out history.
But wait a minute,
what is he saying? So, on one hand, because he's actually said, he's implying, at the very least, that you shouldn't be speaking about something if you're not an expert on it, right? Which is absolutely ridiculous, like this appeal to authority. Well, why are you speaking about history? You're not a historian. So I have to somehow go and get some formal education as a historian before I can read books in my own time? You do realize that the greatest historians, the most brilliant figures that actually knew about history were people that were well-read, not through some academia, or you could apply this in any realm, whether it's in technology. I'm pretty sure Leonardo da Vinci and Nikola Tesla, they didn't go to university, but they were just extremely well-read and spent a lot of their life trying to understand these concepts. I mean, this idea that you have to go through certain ranks in order to be able to speak about a particular topic is absolutely insane. And the frustrating thing is that rather than actually acknowledging the flawed logic behind what he's saying, this is Douglas Murray, he goes on to say, well, why are you going to go and talk about this stuff when you're not, why are you going to go and talk about history if you're not a historian? And I'm not making an appeal to authority argument here, but like, why are you talking about this stuff if you're not an expert? And then you're falling on the fact that you're a comedian. Like, you can be more than one thing. I mean, you can be, I am a singer. I also happen to have a big mouth and I have a podcast, and I also happen to be passionate about a whole bunch of different things. And the idea that I cannot do both is absolutely insane. What are you doing speaking about politics? You're a musician. Oh, what are you doing competing in martial arts? I mean, you're an author. What is this nonsense that you can't be both? Have we not learned anything from Miyamoto Musashi, that once you see the way broadly, you see the way in all things? Joe Rogan, speak to this. I mean, you're all about Mr. Miyamoto Musashi. I've heard Joe Rogan rant many times about this and the Book of Five Rings. I mean, this is a common theme that once you find the underlying discipline that is required to be excellent in one thing, you can apply to many different things. Therefore, it would make perfect sense that if you are a brilliant comedian, you could probably be a pretty good historian and many other things as well if you apply yourself. But I think the implication that Douglas is making here is that, well, you should stick to your tool base. You shouldn't be talking about this topic because you're just not as good as me, which is an absolutely ridiculous argument.
I'm not an expert, but I'm talking all the time about this.
But you're not even talking about specifically on what he just said. What's the solution? To not talk about it?
No, it's to have more experts around.
The expert class hasn't...
Yes, but in order to be an expert, you need to show that you are an expert through what you say, not just by having degrees. I mean, if anything, Dave Smith, by going on all these different podcasts, he's shown that he has a much better understanding of the facts than the vast majority of so-called experts that I've seen speak about this. And I think, if anything, that represents you being an expert. The idea of saying, well, I have not gotten my tick of approval of being an expert according to your worldview of what it means to be an expert, therefore I shouldn't be able to speak about the topic, is an absolutely asinine argument. And this is once again what Douglas Murray is implying. That way, you're not an expert under my eyes. You haven't gone through the necessary levels of academia, therefore you shouldn't be allowed to speak about this.
Done a great job.
I know.
Man. This is follow the science.
Yeah, but you know what? I agree with that. I just said to you, I agree with that.
Right. I know.
But
so
one
Douglas,
of the problems
during all of COVID, I will put my track record against any of the expert class on COVID. So should I have just shut up? Should I have shut up by opposing lockdowns and opposing vaccine mandates and talking
that
about
was the argument?
Exactly. And anyone that has been around for the last 5 years can see exactly where Dave Smith is coming from. The so-called experts that were supposed to be so brilliant with their heuristic models and having an understanding of everything that was going to go on were trying to essentially censor the lay people that were just using common sense to try to understand what was going on. And it turns out people like myself, people like Dave Smith, and anyone that I would say was just using a bit of common sense knew full well what was going on. And even to this day, I feel as if it's not appropriate for me to speak about this because of the censorship that still reigns through on these platforms and so forth. But fundamentally, let's be very clear about this. The so-called experts got so much of what they were saying wrong. And the people that, well, should have just kept their mouth shut, I think it's fair to say for anyone that is truly being honest, that these people were the ones that were actually on the right side of history. And on another note, when it comes to ethics, because people always make this about facts, epistemology, and so forth, it doesn't matter what the facts are. When it comes to actual human rights, there is no amount of knowledge, there's no amount of information, there's no amount of expert advice, right? And this was my number one position during the whole COVID agenda and so forth, that there is no amount of science that is going to justify violating people's natural rights and using some kind of emergency authorization act in order to coerce people into taking whatever it is that you might think is a good idea. Human rights does not work like that. It cannot work like that. It is the basis of a free society to have rights to control your own body, what you're going to put in your body. And as soon as a government tries to coerce people into undergoing these jabs or whatever it might be in the interest of the greater good and trying to put restrictive measures on people, you cross the line. And the most frustrating thing is when people try to make the argument that you're just not educated. No, I just have principles. I just believe in objective morals that don't appeal to potentiality. I just believe in the classic idea of right and wrong, that it's wrong to force people to do things if they're not doing anything in that moment that is inherently wrong. That's the basis of what we call deontological human rights. But so many people have forgotten what that is all about and now make these, well, the science says, and it's a public health and safety measure and so forth. But I think you get the idea.
At the time, you realize
that's the
right?
entire argument that you're making.
Absolutely.
Let the experts handle this.
No.
You're not an expert.
You're
you're right, I was just a comedian.
You're wildly not listening to what I'm saying.
You're saying, I claim to be...
No. He's absolutely listening to what you're saying, as am I, and making a comparison that this argument is basically the same argument. You shouldn't be commenting on this because you don't know enough about it. You're not an expert. We should just listen to the experts. And I would argue, and this is what most sane people arguing, you should listen to the people that are speaking the most amount of sense, because you become an expert by consistently speaking truth, by consistently having the right level of knowledge, level of consciousness, level of awareness. It's not something you just get as a badge. But so many people think that unless, of course, you go through these certain levels of establishment, you can't call yourself an expert.
Be an expert, but then I have like a parachute to get out of it by being like, hey, I'm just a comedian. But I don't think I've ever like really claimed to be an expert.
But
I
why
have
are you
opinions
going around?
on things.
I know, but isn't it weird to be simultaneously saying I'm not an expert on a conflict and talking about it everywhere?
All right, that's his opinion. I don't agree with that, and I think I have a pretty good understanding of how most people perceive this, and I don't think a lot of people. I'd say the generality is that I don't think most people consider that to be weird, for someone to be passionate about many different things, for someone to not be an expert about something and to speak about it. People have opinions. I think most Americans are like that. Is Douglas Murray an American? Maybe he just doesn't understand American culture. Most Americans have a big mouth. They love to talk about shit. They love to talk about shit that they don't even necessarily know anything about. That I would consider pretty normal. Now, I realize that culturally speaking, it might not be, and I don't actually even buy into this argument, but it might be the case that maybe around Douglas Murray's group of people, it's not common. Maybe he's around these erudite intellectuals, so-called intellectual morons, that will only speak about something if they consider themselves to be massively knowledgeable about it. But I don't think, and look, he's not making a moral argument here. He just thinks it's weird that people speak about things they don't have a lot of knowledge about. But I don't think that's weird at all. I actually pretty much don't find anything to be weird. I don't buy into this idea that normality has to be somehow codified in what the most amount of people are doing. And I don't think there's any weird thing about doing something if a lot of people are not doing it. That's just my worldview. I don't think it's weird the fact that he even has that viewpoint, but I would make the argument that most people don't actually think like that. And there's nothing wrong with it. I wouldn't call it weird. I'd just say that it's just not the norm. A lot of people actually comment on things that they know nothing about.
I don't see how you
Do you talk about these things?
Some of them, yeah.
Are you an expert?
I am on some, yes.
On some,
But
but
you talk
not.
about something that you're not an
some are
expert
not.
on.
You'll
What
know-
should you do if those subjects get breached?
Oh my God, he's contradicting himself there. And it's so good. I hope that the vast majority of people that are actually being honest about this, can see the logical inconsistencies here. Because this is, I mean, there are facts, then there are logical inconsistencies, and then there are, I mean, people have different opinions on things, but this is not an area that is subject to opinion. This is a clear case where someone is making an illogical argument, or at the very least, a hypocritical argument, by saying that, look, he finds it weird for you to be speaking about something that you're not an expert on. However, he does this on at least some things. And it's I mean, I'm not going to go on and say that's weird, but that is hypocritical. And if you're trying to make a cogent argument, when you make arguments that imply your hypocrisy, it does not help you in the least bit. And this is what Douglas Murray was doing throughout the podcast.
Well, I think that you educate yourself as much as you
Shouldn't
can.
you say I'm not an expert and then give your opinion if you're in the middle of a conversation?
I think it's a weird move to say, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to talk about it nonstop. I think that is true.
Listen, I will certainly concede that I am weird, but I just fundamentally disagree with this idea that there's an expert class. They can have opinions on all of these things. It's weird for any regular person who's just read about it.
Not my view.
Okay, I actually slightly agree with what Dave Smith says. I don't actually think I don't consider him weird for behaving this way. I'd actually consider it to be the most normal way of behaving. Normal in the sense that whereas most people may not behave like that, may not have the mentality where they have a big mouth about things that they're not an expert in. I don't think that is weird. I don't think it's weird at all. But I absolutely agree with him with this idea that this repulsive idea of there being an expert class that Douglas Murray seems to subscribe to, and you shouldn't be able to have an opinion on something unless, of course, you're part of this expert class. This is what has happened in the world of scientism, where so many people perpetuate this idea that you should not be able to speak about something unless, of course, you have gone through the certain ranks of establishment, because true science has nothing to do with that. True science is not about belonging to an institution. It's a process for arriving at the truth. We all can be scientists. People consider it to be so arrogant when you say that you happen to have a better understanding of certain things that are going on purely because you're self-taught, purely because you believe through consistent effort to look at the truth and try to see it for what it is, and you don't have a degree. Like, I don't have a problem with saying that I know nothing about a particular topic, but I also don't fall into the humility trap. And I think Dave Smith does, because I think Dave Smith is extremely knowledgeable about a lot of these things, and I think he does on some level acknowledge the fact that he is probably more of an expert than the vast majority of people that speak about this stuff, but he doesn't want to say it because it makes you sound arrogant and so forth. I think people should just be able to own the fact that, you know what, I am an expert. I mean, if you're calling yourself an expert, and if I'm listening to the vast majority of people speak about this topic and they're getting it wrong, well, you know what? They are obviously, I mean, if they're calling themselves expert, and I recognize that I'm better, or at least I have a better understanding, a clearer understanding about this issue, then why wouldn't I call myself an expert? Now, personally, on this issue, I am not an expert, but on many of the issues that I find we speak about in current day, I do consider myself an expert, purely because whereas so many experts have gone through the ranks, they're actually restricted in their ability to think objectively, rationally, without this brainwashing that seems to take hold of so many people. This need to be accepted by your peers. This feeling where they cannot branch out of the mass formation consensus reality. And they're so willing to stick to the regimen that they cannot allow their individuated consciousness to manifest through and actually express original ideas, to have true creativity, like to have this ability to actually think outside of the box. And I find so many people within the establishment suffer from this. They're not able to call out the elephant in the room. They're not able to see things that are just blindly obvious, which is what happened with the whole COVID agenda, in my earnest opinion. And in regards to, once again, the Israel-Palestine scenario, I mean, you can pick whatever side you want, but you cannot call what is going on there acceptable, a form of self-defense, that it's somehow acceptable because, hey, they made me do it. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let us know in the comments below what you think about my comments, what you think about the Dave Smith versus Douglas Murray debate. and what you think about the situation in Israel-Palestine. And let us know what it is. Let us know if you want to hear me rant about some other topics going on around the world. But as I always say, remember that there are 3 things that cannot remain hidden for long: the sun, the moon, and the wisdomatic truth bombs of the chocolate Nubian soul brother from Ghana, West Africa, dropping the wisdomatic truth bombs. Trying to do that on the daily, but let's see how we go. Peace!